Character creation will often set the tone for the kind of game that you're about to get into. Because this is the first thing you do when you get into a game, it will also be what most players will take away and remember, even if they choose to abandon the game immediately after. Oblivion character creation is probably the most memeable and prominent of its kind, and so I decided to take some time and reflect on why that is. It is so unhinged that to this day you will see players sharing screenshots on Reddit of when they've managed to create like a halfway decent looking character, and even then half the comments will find something to nitpick at. While I don't believe it was Bethesda's true intention to have gamers generate nightmare fuel that in reality would make the citizens of Cyrodiil collectively say, I think Mankar had a point, I do believe that the eccentricity and wacky look of the characters has been embraced by the community as part of the charm and Oblivion's unspoken trademark. However, I'm not here to cover the character creation as a whole in terms of how far you can push the boundaries of unbridled ugliness. I feel that this has already been explored quite well by others far more creative than I, but I would rather focus on something that by itself I think we all unconsciously remember Oblivion for, and that is the hairstyles. While the abuse of the facial feature sliders is not really something that I believe the devs entirely intended for, the hairstyles were indeed designed to be just as weird and strange as they are in the game. Before we get started, hi, my name is Angelika. I've just been chilling, reading some Elder Scrolls. My eye doctor told me to stop, but he's just a hater. To break it down, there are 10 playable races in the game, including 2 beast races with the Kajit and Argonian, 4 mer races, and 4 man races. While there is some overlap here and there, we're going to take a look at some of the styles available as sort of a general overview and just to bring attention to this particular aspect of character creation in the game. Before breaking down all of the unique styles for races/genders, I do want to note that there is a selection of styles that are available universally across all races, except for the beast races Argonian, Kajit, and also the orcs. Those styles are natural, loose, ponytail, cropped, windbraid, windbound, oiled, rogue knot, and military. There is some additional overlap amongst female/male specific styles, and there's even further overlap amongst the elves. This really isn't indicative of a whole lot of variation available for customization, but even still, the hairstyles in this game, to me, have always been iconic. Now, when customizing hair, you will see that there are several sliders to work with, mostly altering hair color, and the last one altering length. I think this is a nice little detail for that added uniqueness and variation. However, to be completely honest, I don't think that the length slider changes a whole lot in most of the hairstyles. Still, it is nice to have that detail there. Let's start with the Imperials. As is for all races of men, the hair for the most part is pretty standard, exactly what you would expect from a game in this particular fantasy setting. Aside from the styles that I've already mentioned, which is most of the Imperial hairstyles anyway, I will show you some of the gender-specific ones here, such as the tonsure and the thinning for men, and for females you have the ponytail twist and loose combed, which by the way kind of reminds me of someone who watched like one Brad Mondo tutorial and then felt instantly qualified to cut their own bangs.
What would you do if that was your head? I would freak out.
Please never do that. You're not gonna get bangs, you're gonna get an identity crisis. One thing you immediately notice is how the hair, regardless of the color, which by the way can literally be any color that you can think of, is super glossy. Like, it looks like there's an industrial amount of gel that was applied all over their scalp to really reflect the sun's rays, or it's just really greasy. Now that I think about it, I haven't seen a single shower in all of Cyrodiil, so that could be a reason. I also found it funny how one of the hairstyles is called oiled, because when you really look into them, which one of them is not oiled? Moving on to the Nords, you will notice that again, all of the races of men really don't vary all that much in terms of what hairstyles are available to them. Even though some of the styles are universally available to both genders, I don't think they're meant to suit both of them. Like, they're there, they're available, but for NPCs, you will mostly see them stick with whatever was made with their specific gender in mind. Redguards then have ridge rose, thick rose, and the frizzy hairstyle, and as far as the length slider goes, I think these particular styles are the ones where you can kind of see it have most impact, or at least the one where I see the slider kind of work more than it does for other types of hairstyles. Just for the other styles and how the slider works, it doesn't really make a significant change to the overall look of the character, but I feel like for those particular styles, it kind of does. Bretons can have all the exact same hairstyles as Imperials, and if you're ever stuck between which of the two races you should choose, just go for Bretons with all of their racial benefits. Don't let aesthetics be like a deciding factor. It really doesn't matter. Unless you're like 100% sure that you want to be an Imperial, but then like knock yourself out. Let's talk about elves or mer, and I specify this as orcs are actually part of this particular grouping because they're called Orsimer. Though this is never formally recognized or mentioned by anyone out in the world, orcs are of elven blood. Starting with Altmer or the High Elves, this is where things start to get interesting. Some of their most notable styles for the men are the mane, the ridgeback, which is like an actual mohawk, mohawk, the high style, and upswept. Now, looking specifically at high style and upswept, I remember being very confused when first seeing this, so my traditional understanding of elves in general were based on Legolas, you know, the flowing long hair, perfectly silky, or maybe something that I would have seen in World of Warcraft, like long braids. Like, in general, I felt that hair was always like an important and defining feature for elves. So can somebody please tell me what this is? Who thought of this? Whose idea was this? What was the inspiration? This doesn't even say fantasy RPG to me. Like, I'm seeing Santa's little helper, and they may not be wearing the hats, but to be honest, they don't even need them. They have them like pre-built in. Have you heard of the High Elves? Yeah, this is them. All jokes aside, particularly for the High Elves, there seemed to be some sort of inspiration coming from the Far East. Now, this is explored in a lot of detail by YouTuber Leftover Pat in his video about races and how they correspond to real-life cultures, so I really recommend that you check that out if you haven't already. But there he mentions that High Elves have sort of a lot of overlap with Imperial China, and I'm also seeing a lot of that there, but for these hairstyles in particular, I'm seeing kind of the Edo period Japan hairstyles commonly worn by like samurais. I would say it's sort of loosely based on that, especially if you look at this image here. I'll be honest, when I was like a first time player, I couldn't really understand it or see the correlation between elves and this type of hair. Of course, I am a lot more used to it now after years of being into the Elder Scrolls, and I think it's one of those things that's like a big part of Oblivion's image as well. Seeing again some Far East influence in the female Altmer styles, specifically the pulled knot and the stick twist styles, so the amount of volume and the way that the hair is pulled all the way back gives me like medieval Japan hairstyle vibes. It's not exact, but like the concept more or less comes from there, I believe. For Altmer, you can potentially connect it to that sort of real-life cultural overlap, but then we look at Wood Elves. So once again, we're not really seeing anything like Legolas of the Woodland Realm, but rather the same styles as we looked at with High Elves. And though they are iconic, I just wish there was more variation between these races of elves. It feels like the individuality or what makes a particular race of elves unique is not as fully explored here as I think it could have been. Even culturally, when we talk about Wood Elves versus High Elves, Altmer are described as these like proud, tall, really snobbish beings. They see themselves as superior compared to not just other races of elves, but every other race. And then we have the Bosmer, who are actually quite small. They're supposed to be really quick and nimble. They align their lifestyle with the nature around them, which reminds me a lot of how the Night Elves in World of Warcraft are. So I think for them, honestly, it would have suited a lot more to have these more like effortless styles, less of that like high upswept styling, and maybe more braids or some, I don't know, leaves in the hair, some kind of druid vibes. It does feel like they kind of grouped elves together and decided to default like to just these particular sets of hairstyles and kind of leave it at that. We can only hope that we will see this kind of expanded on in the Elder Scrolls 6, but then also we shouldn't hope. Now here's my take on the Dark Elves. Even though they share all of the same hairstyles with the other elven races, I always felt that because of what they look like in general, those same hairstyles give a completely different vibe. For that, I feel like the repetition of the hair can almost somewhat be forgiven. If we think back to Morrowind and how alien and unusual their world is, it would make sense that the Dunmer hairstyle reflects the unconventional setting that they come from. Orcs are an interesting race to look at for hairstyles because they don't share any styles with any of the other races. I would again say that there is some like Far Eastern inspiration there, but it's a lot grittier and it's not as neatly put together and like gelled back as the elves have it. Orcs in general already stand out from the other races due to their greenish complexions and unique facial features. The hair takes it one step further to truly set them apart, and in my opinion, the orcs had the best hairstyles when it comes to highlighting the individuality of a particular race. Really, some of the more memorable styles for me, for both male and female characters, were from orcs. Now for Kajit, which is the most based race in all of Tamriel, the hair options are quite limited. As a whole, they're not bad, but I think the biggest miss here was not allowing for just like no additional hair on the head. Like every hairstyle adds something, whether it's like a longer mane, dreads, braids, or some accessories, but there's no option to just have like nothing on your head, and I think I would have really liked that. That said though, I think they all look good, and I like that there's hair with accessories just to kind of make Kajit stand out culturally as well, so it's not just like cat equals mane. Argonians are surprisingly versatile when it comes to their hair, and no, I don't mean that there's like a lot of options, but the ones that are there are quite different from one another. To be honest, I can appreciate that a lot more than what was done for the men, where you have several variations of a style that essentially doesn't really set you apart from other NPCs. You can have spikes, fins, or a ridge. The length slider actually works to make quite a difference there, and it almost feels like you're dealing with different breeds of Argonians depending on the hairstyle they have. Just like the female Kajit, Argonian females can have jewelry and decoration options, again, to kind of just embrace the culture and set them apart from the other races. It might sound silly considering how different Argonians are already, but you know, I think it is a nice touch. And this concludes my brief overview of the hair of all of the playable races in The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Overall, I have to say that the hairstyles in this game are somewhat lackluster. I feel that more could have been done to differentiate the races, especially the ones that look quite similar already, like Imperials and Bretons. I did consider though that because they all live in Cyrodiil, they all just end up following fashion trends, and like the local barbers don't offer or know how to do anything else, so, you know, kind of like in real life. For example, here in Ireland, most of the guys will wear the exact same hairstyle, and you know, you see them kind of gathering outside of McDonald's and you wonder, how do they tell each other apart? And then you see Polish guys coming over to Ireland and you know, they've all got the same haircuts as well. Like, I feel like the place that you're in also greatly influences that, and so this could just be like a Cyrodiil thing and not like an overall race thing. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, again, please leave a like and subscribe. I am really enjoying making this content and I really appreciate all of the support that I've received so far. If you're new here, welcome to the channel and be sure to check out my other videos. Be seeing you, bye!